Welcome to Always Considered. I'm your host, Charlie Merritt.
And I'm your host, Julius Spicciani. Charlie, can you tell me how you got into surfing?
Okay, so my first surf memory was when I was about 16 years old. I was living in Pensacola and begged my mom to take me surfing. She agreed finally after weeks of begging to take me out. We went out to Perdido Key, got in the water. A thunderstorm moved close to the beach, and my mom freaked out, started waving her hands, waving us in front of all the other surfers, who was my first time even meeting those guys. Really embarrassing moment. Don't even think I got to catch a wave, honestly, and that's my first surfing memory.
Charlie, can you tell me how things started to escalate with your surfing?
I didn't have access to a car until I was 18, so I ended up making friends with some of the local guys, Kevin Holiday, Michael Fraley, and a lot of the other guys from Escambia High School. They would always skip school and go surfing. And so once I got in with them, I was doing the same thing. Once I got a car, then I was skipping even more school, catching a lot more waves because I wasn't really studying and I was still getting good grades and almost didn't graduate because of all the days I had missed from skipping school to go surf. It got so bad my mom actually had to call the school when she knew the wind was offshore and tell them that I'm not supposed to be leaving that day.
Charlie, what year were you in high school?
Yeah, like 88, somewhere in there, yeah, 88. In Pensacola was when I started. I think I graduated in 90. After I got my car was around the time that they had dredged both passes. First, I think, was Pickens, and then it was Alabama Point. So Alabama Point, I remember when they initially dredged that one, the pipe was still on the west side of the jetty. We got some days there that were just incredible. I mean, open, gaping barrels that would just break as long as you could ride them, it seemed. Pickens was a little bit different. It was a longer wave, just a little bit more flat-faced, and didn't seem to last as long. We scored Alabama Point back in that time period for what seemed like 2 or 3 months of swells and just incredible waves there.
You ended up moving because you wanted better waves to Satellite Beach. Can you tell me about that?
From as soon as I graduated high school, I was saving money to move to the East Coast. I was there within probably a year and a half of graduating high school. I lived with like probably 8 guys in 2 2-bedroom apartments. And all we did was work pizza jobs, or I worked at Dairy Queen actually. And so we could surf the East Coast. And that's really where I started to get a lot more experience. Ended up meeting a lot of surfers there. And one of the guys I met was planning a trip to Costa Rica, invited me along. And that was my first surf trip. And from the first time that I really got in the country, I knew right away that that's where I wanted to die, basically. So surfing Costa Rica and then going back to the East Coast and was just night and day difference. And I realized that for me, I needed to be somewhere where the waves were always good. I started to plan, even at that age, to move to Costa Rica, which happened about 10 years after that. You know, when I think back to learning to surf in Pensacola, and even when I go back there, I really have a lot of respect for the guys there because they barely get any waves. It must be frustrating for them. I just feel lucky to be living in Costa Rica and experiencing the dream waves that we get here.
What were things like when you first got here?
Once I had enough money to get to Costa Rica, it didn't quite go the way I planned, but I got down here and basically just started hanging out in this guy's bar in Dominical because that was a spot that I really fell in love with Costa Rica. Eventually he was like, I was just bussing tables and stuff as the night was going on, and he asked me if I wanted a job there, and I was like, yes please. It ended up being just room and board, but I was on the waves. That was just a really special time coming down from the States and moving down here, where it was like night and day difference. It was so much more laid back here and a lot less responsibility. I was getting waves, as many waves as I wanted. Dominical at that time was more like a family. There wasn't a lot of surfers in Dominical, only a handful. Everyone was like a big family. Just a special time in my life. My surfing really improved very quickly at that time. I just look back on that time as some of the best years of my life.
Charlie, you had told me the story about how you had developed a substance abuse issue and how that had led you down a path where you didn't surf for a while. Can you tell me about that?
With all good comes some bad. One of the negative things that happened at the same time so many things were going right was a heavy addiction into cocaine, because at the bar I worked at, part of my job was to sell cocaine to the customers who always wanted to invite me to some in the bathroom, which I never said no to. Built a heavy addiction from there. Stopped surfing as much. My life started to revolve more around working at night and partying. I'd be too hungover the next day to surf. As that job fizzled out, I found myself looking for other opportunities to make money, which led me to San Jose, where my drug addiction continued, and went through jobs there pretty quickly until I found that I could DJ and make money doing that, and that really just fueled the fire with the drug addiction. Probably 8 years solid, 4 of which I stopped surfing completely, maybe 5. My life was just really spinning, into a bad place. Almost homeless a couple times, and never even thought about the reason why I came down here, which was surfing. I really was just focused on partying. Luckily, I got a DJ gig offered to me on the beach and still had my board. A buddy of mine was driving me to the gig, who I was staying with him for that weekend to do the DJ gig, and he dropped me off to go surfing. It was the first time I paddled out in probably at least 5 or 6 years, and I just had the most incredible session. It was like I'd forgotten nothing. The waves were probably some of the best I've ever seen that particular spot. I just had the best time. No one else was in the water, which was really strange. So I had this whole beach to myself, basically. Glassy, shoulder high with bigger sets peeling through, and that just changed my life. It was right after that gig that I ended up selling my equipment and threw my phone into a river, and so that I couldn't be tempted to call the drug dealers and get back on drugs, and spent about 3 months in kind of solitude environment, and until I knew I was strong enough to resist and really turn my focus back on surfing. It really saved my life. I mean, surfing saved my life. Once I got back into it, it was all about progressing and getting better, which happened for a while. And then my mom got sick and I had to move back to Pensacola. I was back to barely surfing, only getting a few trips to Costa Rica every year. Now that I'm back in Costa Rica, I'm right back to trying to progress, analyzing all of the video that you've shot to look for ways to improve on maneuvers and what I'm doing wrong. I'm still trying to take it to the next level.
Charlie, you seem to have a group of people around you that push you to surf, that kind of have given you a surf community. Can you tell me about that?
I think that's the best thing about surfing. When you get that group of guys who are just frothy every morning, it's about, me and my boys are messaging each other an hour before daybreak, talking about conditions and, wind checks and everything else. And since I'm on the beach, they kind of depend on me to give them that information. I think, with that surfing lifestyle, the guys that you meet that are really hardcore about it, it takes you back to when you first started, or just those times in your life where surfing was, so special to you. As I age, I still find myself like that little kid, when I first saw waves and how excited I was to get out there and jump on my board. That's something that it's just never declined. It just continues to be the most important thing. Like when we went surfing the other day, and I was so excited to jump in the water, even though the waves sucked, that I didn't have my leash attached to my board, so ended up losing that leash. And yeah, the waves were pretty shit, but it was still a great day. I think surfing is just an unmatched sport as far as just being surrounded by nature. Literally, you're riding nature, and I don't think any other sport does that.
Charlie, can you tell me about your favorite surf session, best wave, something like that?
It's hard. There's been so many. There's just these standout ones. I've been to Mexico, Panama, Nicaragua, been a lot of places surfing, and each one of them has just standout days. Probably the one that stands out number 2 to that Hako session, only because that one changed my life. So the waves weren't the most incredible ever, but that was the session where I really felt like my life just took a turn. So I think that one will always be the most special. But I was lucky enough to catch Pavones on the double overhead swell. That session, I had an incredible session, and the waves were something straight out of a movie. It didn't even seem real how far they were breaking. There was very few people out there because it was so big, and that's one of the ones I'll never forget. The Pavones one thing that happened to me in that session was I duck dove this wave you normally would. I got deep underneath it, and I was actually, the transition as it moved along the reef was, well, the cobblestone rock bottom, to be accurate, was pushing me sideways under the water. So it almost drowned me. I finally had to ditch my board and swim to the top because I was moving sideways under my water, flat on my board. But I just remember looking out there and seeing those sets coming, and it's just something you'll never forget. It was these mountains of water, and they were just peeling perfection, double overhead and barrels. I remember getting waves that you could take 4 or 5 breaks on the wave. Like you drop in, get a couple snaps, cut back, and your legs would start to burn. So you'd stand there and the wave would just not change, and it was just peeling. You'd stand there for what seemed to be like 2 or 3 minutes. Of course, it was probably like 30 seconds. And then your legs would kind of recover, and you do it again, and started to get shorter and shorter as far as like how long you were braking, because you were only doing 1 or 2 turns. And then it was just your legs couldn't take anymore. And I remember kicking out of the longest wave I got, and I still watched it go for what seemed to be a mile. As far as to where it looked like it was a dot. You could just tell it was still peeling. Just peeling perfection. You could see the shoulder. And I don't even know how far that wave went. It was that big and perfect. So
coming to Costa Rica, I have experienced a lot of fear. My second day in Santa Teresa, I almost had a panic attack. I had to do box breathing to get myself under control. Surfing here in the Osa, there's been many times where I'm not going to surf because the waves are too big. And that has been a really good inflection point for me to address the kind of person I am and to confront a lot of my own fears. Can you tell me about how that internal process of dealing with your fears and navigating them, what that looks like for you?
I think everyone has that same amount of fear, especially on bigger waves. It's something that you just have to learn to kind of overcome. And the more time that you spend in bigger waves, the easier it gets. But it's just progression, though. You start with what you feel comfortable in, and then you got to push yourself and test yourself. I still don't know that I'm as comfortable as I was when I was younger. I dealt with a couple injuries surfing, and once you get injured, I think that leaves bad taste in your memory to where you're a little bit more cautious for fear of being injured again. So I think when you're paddling in, if you're going to try and paddle into a wave you're not comfortable in, the most important thing is to just not hesitate and don't second guess yourself, because you don't want to get stuck at the top and get thrown over the falls. That's going to hurt a lot worse than dropping in. And even if you just drop in straight and make it to the bottom, you're going to be in a better spot. You got to commit, and once you do, just paddle as hard as you can and try and get down that face.
Can you tell me about your attitude on surfing as you've gotten older?
You coming down here and getting some drone footage is just helping me really analyze my surfing. 52 at this point, and I'm still trying to improve. I think that's never going to stop until I don't feel like I can paddle out and catch waves on the same level. But for now, it's full speed ahead. I've been working on new tricks, trying to perfect old ones. I still want to be the best I can be, even if it's not as good as other guys are that are out in the water. I'm my biggest critic, and so I'm never going to stop trying to perfect the art of surfing. Thank you for watching Always Considered. I've been your host, Charlie Merritt. Keep charging, never stop dreaming, and score some firing surf.